Black just seemed appropriate for this topic. After completing my first violin, which was really pretty bad, I decided that that's who I really was, and I made it a point to visit all the best luthiers in the world that I possibly could. I started with the most recent gold medal winner at that time, Paul Hart. I made the arrangements over the phone and we talked a little bit, but as I walked in his door, he was sitting at his workbench and barely even glanced up at me before picking up an old rusty nail and jabbing it into the surface of his brand new violin. I believe my first words to him in person were, "Why would you ever do such a thing?" To which he replied, "Someday you'll understand." He went on to give me some great advice and critiqued my instrument and later sold me some very fine violin wood. He really was wonderful and exactly what I needed at that time. Yet, I couldn't help cringing every time he would pick up a rusty old nail and jab it into the surface of his brand new violin. Because it really was my goal at that time, and for the next 10 years, to make the perfect violin. Years later, after making dozens of violins, violas, and a cello, and having good success in the blindfold comparison tests with the masters, I was still struggling to sell my instruments for as much as I had paid for the finest spruce, maple, and varnish materials. And about this time, a young lady came by, a rising star, and requested what she described to be a perfect violin. She loved the idea of playing upon a new, flawless instrument with no repairs and no problems, yet a beautiful voice. The violin ended up being, in her opinion, absolutely perfect in every way. And she loved it. She loved it so much, in fact, that she would bring it back every couple months so that I could put a little French polish on the upper and lower bouts and around the scroll so that the varnish would never show anywhere. And she would also have me touch up the smallest, tiniest scratch or nick and then polish over so that her violin remained absolutely perfect. On the fourth visit back, though, everything changed. Instead of bubbling over with happiness, she was melancholy and forlorn, and I barely recognized her. By the time she opened the case and lifted it out, she was crying. "I love my violin," she explained, "but it's been getting worse after each concert." I asked her, "What, the sound?" And she said, no, it's perfect. If you haven't heard, just 2 nights ago, I played a duet with one of the finest Del Jesus in the world, and the performance was wonderful. It was a dream come true. Every time I would solo, the audience would swoon and fall back in their seats in ecstasy. I couldn't imagine anything more. Even would look over at me because the sound was so wonderful. Yet after the performance, when everybody came rushing past and his Guarnerius to see what I was playing, the first comment I heard was, "Oh, it's a new violin?" And everybody's expressions changed. I even held it up closer and said, "Yes, it's a new violin, Isn't it fantastic? And the next comment I heard was, I guess it'll do for now, but when you can afford it, you'll buy a Stradivarius or a Guarnerius. And they walked away. That young lady then began bawling, and she turned her face away from me, I believe, in shame. She then handed me the violin like this, and the only words she said to me were, "Do it," as she walked out the door. As soon as she was gone, for the first time in my life, I found an old rusty nail and began beating up the surface of her perfect violin, just like I had seen Paul Hart do so many years before. I even replaced the label inside with a hand-pressed one, without a date, and I only signed my middle name, so she'd never have to be embarrassed again. After her next concert, she called to tell me how much happier she was, especially after the performance. And that's when I decided to take some time off, to either prove or disprove an old myth that some pretty famous authorities had told me years before, yet I refused to believe it. What I'm about to say has always been controversial, yet here it goes. The myth that a violin cannot speak freely or have a wonderful voice for at least 50 years is over 300 years old. And during the lives of Stradivarius and Guarnerius, a 50-year-old Jacob Steiner violin was worth at least 2 to 3 times more. With that said, after visiting dozens of violins, my favorite for this legend became Fritz Kreisler's Guarnerius. Because even though I spent 3 days looking at the varnish and under magnification, under different lights, I actually discovered within a few minutes that most of the damage, most of the scratches, most of the dents, and all of the flavor and character actually was done before and during the varnish process by Joseph Guarnerius himself. What I found was both masters antiqued their instruments. I believe what made it so difficult for others to find the truth in the past is that the amount of antiquing varied so much from instrument to instrument. But they both did it. Yes, both masters made immaculate instruments, mainly Stradivarius. Yet there were other times that they were very highly antiqued and made to look at least 50 to 100 years old, especially Guarnerius. Think of it this way. A true master luthier will do whatever it takes to satisfy their customers' needs and to fulfill their dreams. But that's another story. It's a wonderful story, and I hope you take the time to enjoy it someday.